Hell yes. In the last few days, my Facebook wall has been literally flooded with stories about these spikes that are being installed all over the place to stop homeless people from sleeping on the streets. And everyone is sharing them and so quickly, and it's the usual sort of like emotional thing, like what has humanity come to, which is understandable and all that. However, the fact that there's such a proliferation of these stories and these photographs of these circular and triangular spikes sticking up out of the ground, and also one story of a park bench where if you don't put money in it, the spikes come up to stop homeless people from sleeping on it. If you want to sit on the bench, you have to put money in the bench, and then the spikes go down. Well, I've been just thinking about this sudden proliferation of these stories, and these things never happen by accident. There's something going on that they're planning to do with the homeless. Now let's talk about the homeless first. I've known people who are homeless, and I know people who work with the homeless, and they will tell you that a lot of homeless people actually choose homelessness instead of being part of the system. They don't consider themselves unfortunates who are disadvantaged. They actually see themselves as being free of the system. If you go down to the docks or some of the broken, the unused apartments and all shops and buildings around Sligo town, there's homeless people living in them down the old railway yards. And this is repeated in towns and cities all over the world. These people are not unfortunates. They're collecting the dole. They have, well, in Ireland anyway, in other countries, they will have free healthcare through the state. So they're not paying rent. They're living for free. And in many cases, they're actually utilizing buildings and fixing them up that have been greedy developers have like tried to get rich on. And then the building was repossessed by the bank and then left to rot. And the homeless actually move in and turn them into like proper homes. We're talking about basically squatting. Suddenly there's a proliferation of these stories about the homeless. And it's funny how they just show up in summertime, like the time of the year when the tourists are arriving in all the cities and they don't want the homeless on the streets. I reckon there's some kind of big roundup of the homeless they're planning. I think some EU law is about to come in to say that homelessness has to be eliminated, and they'll try and spin it in such a way that we're saving these poor people from the streets. But you have to remember that yeah, there are unfortunates who've lost their homes, lost their jobs, and don't want to be homeless. And yet they should be helped if they approach the system for help. But that's only one segment of the homeless population. Like I said, the homeless people who choose homelessness as a lifestyle, they should be left alone. They should not be bothered, rounded up or anything. So when you're sharing these stories of these spikes sticking up out of the ground, be very careful because you're probably playing into some kind of government or some kind of social agenda that's done a target and make things worse for the homeless. Like the homeless people who are actually happy on the streets or squatting or, living down in old industrial areas are going to be rounded up and put into some kind of homes or poor houses, like they had the workhouses in Victorian Ireland, where if you couldn't live on the streets, you were put in a workhouse. People so hated the workhouse that they chose living in the woods and over it. And are we going back to that? Now, whenever anything suddenly shows up as a fad on Facebook, I know the agenda has and the control grid has put that up there. These stories are not about generating sympathy for the homeless. What they're really about is, I'm pretty sure, is to cultivate something. It's like a classic Hegelian dialect. Something must be done to protect the homeless. Now they won't remove the spikes, And remember, these spikes, they're not everywhere. They're in a few places, but the internet makes it sound like they're everywhere. That famous one in London, there's one outside the apartment building. You probably find within 20 feet, there's probably 50 other places a homeless person can sleep. But that one gets the focus to make it sound like the whole of London has those spikes. And then you have a guy who doesn't look homeless at all, doesn't look like he had a bad day in his life. Probably some SWP councillor or someone like that, someone who's actually working for the government, pretending to be a radical. Start sitting there in a sleeping bag with a little sign saying, the homeless deserve homes, not spikes. What's that about? When these kinds of things flood the internet, the first question you ask yourself is why? rather than an immediate emotional response of how sad and tragic this is, because these bastards, one hand is given and the other one is taken away, and always look for what they're taken away. So let's watch out that spike story for the homeless, because I think that's actually going to reveal a much more sinister agenda to do with social engineering and social control. And homeless people have every right in the world to be homeless if they choose that.